Good morning, everyone. Trust you can hear me. Welcome to the press briefing of the EPOC. We have representatives with us online and in the room, and we want to welcome everyone. Not seeing all the media house names online, but I see that we have IRI FM and we have Gleaner so far. If I have not acknowledged you, please state it beside your name. In the room, we have OUR Today, we have Nationwide, we have CVM, TVJ, and we have representative from the MOF team. We have our support team with us and from Procom and Intelligent, and we want to welcome everyone online and in the room. I will now hand over to Mr. Duncan, the chairman of the Economic Program Oversight Committee, who will have our report to share with us.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining physically and online. We're going to go through a report. We're going to take our time and go through the report, and together we'd like to get absolute context and appreciation of where we are. So we'll be going through monetary, fiscal, and a review of the budget. A high-level review of the budget and possible implications. So good morning, everyone. Again, thank you. So EPOC met on April 12th to review fiscal and monetary quantitative performance indicators on the government of Jamaica's economic reform program. As you can imagine, we got a lot more data coming in after April 12th, right, which was even up to 2 days ago that we got data of the fiscal numbers, and we had to dig deep and go back to work again to really update our numbers and to reflect where we are currently. So because in our initial overview that we had the February numbers and the March numbers came in on Tuesday, okay? So we updated our numbers accordingly. But what I'd like to highlight as we go on is that the tax revenues that we're all very much aware for the month of March came in significantly below budget, about 20% below budget in the month of March, not year to date, right? Inflation has come into the target range in March, given by range to 5.6%. Our NIR levels are historic levels, over $5.14 billion at the end of March. And we, within the IMF program, the precautionary liquidity and liquidity line of resilience sustainability facility, as this December 2023, we have met all the structural, benchmark, and indicative targets. So, in the main, good news, mixed news. When we look at the fiscal performance, I think this is the first time we're seeing some of the rates on our, we normally this is all green, right? Then this is now we're seeing some reds, right? And that is primarily due to the fiscal outturn, the tax revenue outturn in the month of March. If you were here in February, this table would have been quite different. In February, when we reviewed the numbers, the year to date with the government of Jamaica was ahead of budget. And for the month of February, there was a slight, for the February, the actual outturn in the month of February was very marginal behind budget, right? However, in the month of March, this is where we saw the significant impact. No, we have heard the Minister of Finance speak to the month of March, this being almost a very risky, because this is when everyone files, and this is when they have the huge inflows of tax revenues, and therefore you don't have all the data. You don't have the data when when you're crafting your budget. You don't have this data, and you may have a sense that revenues could be off, but if you look at the month of February, it was marginally off, but then we saw significant fall off in the month of March. In fact, revenues in specific categories, which we will address, right? So let's look at the total revenues, and we're going to against the four supplementary estimates, right? So total revenues and grants came in at 925 billion, right? And that was, actually 11.8% greater than the previous year. So total revenues and grants actually grew 11.8%, but behind budget year to date by $22.4 billion, right? So we're only 2% behind 2.4% for total revenues and grants behind them, right? Tax revenues, right, were came in at $831.6 billion, $78.7 billion higher than the previous year, 10.5% greater than the previous year. So tax revenues are growing and are growing. What we saw was the impact in March, right? But it came in $24.8 billion, 2.9% behind budget, right? So tax revenues continue to grow, a growth of 10.5%. Total revenues growth of 11.2%. That's way above the inflation numbers, and it shows that there is still some robustness to the economy and tax revenues. Yeah. Let's look deeper into the numbers, and we go into the revenue categories. For income and profits, and this is where we see where there was some call up, right? In income and profits, they outturned from tax and income and profits $274 billion, which was $15.7 billion behind budget, right? And $38 billion higher than the previous year. That's 16.3%. But this is where the fall off was. The fall off really occurred in the corporate income tax line, which came in at $93.1 billion, which was $14.3 billion behind target, and basically flat year over year. Corporate income tax. PAYE was in line with budget at $134.6 billion and $27.2 billion, 25% above the previous year. So it shows that with the record lows of low unemployment rate, and PAYE number is still performing as budgeted. Where we're behind is in the corporate income tax line in this income tax, right? When we look at production and consumption revenue, the second category, what we see is it came in at $263 billion, which was lower than budget by $3.6 billion. And remember, this report something into it. But $30 billion, 13% greater than the previous financial year, right? GCT again, which tells you a little bit about the state of the economy and consumption and economic activity, was marginally ahead of budget at $158.2 GCT limited, and $28.2 billion, 21.6 greater than the previous year. So if you look at PAYE, we look at GCT local, it tells you underlying economic activity, that consumption is still very much occurring. Where we have the issue is in the corporate income tax line, right? Revenues from international trade were behind budget, marginally behind budget, at $5.5 billion behind budget. What was $10.1 billion greater than the previous fiscal year, right? 3.6% data, right? So total revenues, in fact, grew 10.5%. Total, we're doing 11.8%. Total revenue grew by 11.8% for the year. And we saw it fall off in March, and we saw that in the corporate income tax, and a few other lines. So when we look at the month of March, what we see here occurring is that revenues and grants were budgeted to come in at $160.5 billion, came in at $131.2 billion. Behind target $29 billion, 18.2%. The March actual last year was $128 billion. So therefore you're seeing that year over year, March of last year, total revenues and grants are $128 billion, $131. So fairly marginally up at about 2.3% higher in the month of March. Again, for tax revenue specifically, the budget was $140 billion, came in at $111.9 billion, off by $20 billion. This is 20% down and off by $20 billion, right? But a marginal growth of 1.7% year over year. Right, so it's March is where we see where we had the biggest impact in the fall of inflation, right? And there, you know, there, we discussed the corporate income tax, which is where the bulk of the fallout occurred. There was some fallout in other areas, but the primarily was due to corporate income tax line, right? As we go forward, so therefore, that's the story with revenues, and we can have a discussion after around this. Let's now move to expenditures. Expenditures net of amortization were 924 billion, which was 14.4 billion lower than program. Okay? This was due to in the current programs, the spending was below budget by 10.3 billion, and capital expenditure was below budget by 3.3 billion. Total wage and salaries, that big line was at 378.2 billion in line with budget. Right? When we look at the growth of expenditures year over year, fiscal 2024, we see growing by 104.1 billion total expenditures, right? And that's a 12.7% increase. Now it's on a taxes, total tax revenue is by 8%. So revenue and expenditures grew by 12.7%. What makes up the majority of this growth in expenditures is from the public sector compensation exercise, which is $60 billion, and interest costs due to higher interest rates in international domestic markets at $20 billion. So $80 billion of this growth of $104 billion came from wages and salaries from the public sector compensation exercise and increased interest due to higher interest rates in the domestic market and international markets. Okay? So therefore, where were we in terms of fiscal balance and our primary balance, which we underlined, we were still able to manage a fiscal surplus of $1.2 billion, and which was $8 billion behind the target of $9.9 billion. So marginally off, but still a surplus, right? Fiscal balance, a surplus. And therefore, the primary surplus, this is what drives really our reduction in debt to GDP ratios, right? Was at $173.3 billion primary surplus, short of the target by $8.15 billion. Right? This was primary surplus was actually higher than the previous year of $40.2 billion higher than the previous year of $159.2 billion. So in spite of the fall off in the month of March, which there could be timing issues in terms of we can discuss, and they were able to maintain the fiscal surplus and primary balance is marginally behind target. And because the primary surplus is going marginally behind target, we are still on track to hit our 72% debt to GDP ratio, which was ahead of the initial projection, initial budget of 74%. So we are on track to hit approximately 72% debt to GDP ratio with over $2.2 trillion nominal debt, which has probably remained fairly in that range over a period of time. So nominal debt hasn't really moved, but our GDP has grown, and that's our debt to GDP ratio will always be improving and continuously improve. So we're happy to see that the downward debt trajectory continues. When we look at the budget now, 24-25 budget, and I have a table here, and I just wanted to be able to, I think everybody has it, right? The table. Where we looked at, where we ended the year, remember we had the 4 supplementary estimates where we expected to end the year, right? And then we had the provisional, which was the new numbers that came in, right? So if we look at, and then we have our budgeted numbers. So the big area to focus around is revenues and grants, right? Total revenues and grants, which is this $1 billion, right? So therefore, we came in, we budgeted to end the year in our 4 supplementary estimates, and now it's $47.6 billion, right? That is where we budgeted to end the year. We ended the year at 925. So therefore, there was supposed to be a growth in total revenues and grants of 85 billion based on what was projected. But no, there would have to be a growth of $108 billion. So that would be the revenues and grants shortfall that would have to be made. Want to get that? And you see it in tax revenue also in that we're projected to end the year at 856 for tax revenue, in the year at 831, and therefore we in the budget we were projected to grow tax revenue 7.9% or $68 billion. Now we have to grow tax revenue $92.6 billion if we have to maintain the expenditure profile that we have there. To actually, so therefore, we would have to actually grow tax revenue $92.6 billion. That is an 11.2% growth over the year end, but that would almost be in line with the growth that we saw last year, where tax revenues grew about 10%, right? Last year, so therefore, we'd expect tax revenues to grow marginally greater than that 10%. To be able to deliver on the expenditures that have been budgeted for, right? That is the purpose of this bill, right? The expenditures don't move, but what moves here is the revenue line, right? And they got to be made up. So of the expenditures, when we look at expenditures, net of amortization, which is that rollover, is about $1 trillion. 9.4% recurring and $8 billion in capital expenditure, a 10.8% increase over previous year, right? So therefore, expenditures to increase 10.8%. We see tax revenues continue to grow in the 10% range. So therefore, it is we're not way up, right? The overall budgeted recurrent expenditures broken out into recurrent program spending and compensation is the big ticket item. Compensation on employees $442 billion, right? Total wage and salary is the main component of compensation employees is at $414.2 billion. That's a $36 billion increase rate. So remember, we're in the third year, we're in the final year of the public sector compensation restructure exercise, which is the final year, and we're in, and therefore it just budgeted costs at $414 billion for the salaries. $80 billion is capital expenditure, which includes $20 billion of the for the SPARK program, for the community roads, etc. for 2014. Debt service really is the total between amortization and interest costs. Really, amortization is not going to grow. Interest costs remains flat year over year. If you look into the budget numbers, you see that interest costs remain fairly flat year over year. So therefore, I think we're budgeting for GOJ is budgeting for interest rates to be at their peak, and that's what we're seeing in the market at this point in time. Right. So funding this budget. So what is this budget going to be funded? Right, so it'll be funded, as we say, from our revenue and loan receipts, but of the 1.24 trillion. But in terms of non-tax earnings of budget includes tax and non-tax earnings, $924 billion of revenues and grants and $103 billion of non-tax revenue. There will be also the securitization of receivables, and there will be a flow of $45 billion from the sale of receivables. On this budget, with $20 billion included in the non-tax revenues and $25 billion to fund the revenue measures that were announced in the Minister of Finance's closing budget presentation, right? So there is a list of revenue measures that were announced, and it total $25 billion. This is to be funded by the $25 billion of the securitization of government of Jamaica receivables. Right. The big ticket items here are the reverse income tax credit for individuals earning up to $3 million. Remember, the minister pointed out that this is the more vulnerable group, and if there's an opportunity for them to be able to get a tax credit, they would have to file their income taxes and be able to get a payment of $20,000. Right, and this is a one-off, so this is not a recurring. Right, it's a one-off. The increase in annual personal income taxes, the threshold 1.5 to 1.7, cost $8.9 billion. That is ongoing, right? When the BOJ assess the revenue measures, they indicate that there is no significant threat to the inflation targets as a result of these recommendations. Okay. So when we look at the budget is programmed to generate fiscal and primary surpluses, balance surplus of 9.9, fiscal surplus and 183.6 billion. We end the year, as we said, with a 1.2 billion this year, projected for 9.9, and we ended the year at another 1 cent. The primary surplus was somewhat the primary surplus we ended the year at was $172 billion and we're predicted for 183 billion. The debt to GDP ratio within the budget is projected to fall to 64.4% at the end of 24-25. The key assumptions driving this budget is the GDP growth of 1.8%, point-to-point inflation of 5.8%. These are the assumptions driving the budget. The downside risk to the growth could be from a slowdown in global economic activity, geopolitical risk, supply chain issues. And another positive that will occur is the renewal of the World Bank right? Which is really a positive thing. Everybody feel the earthquake last night, right? Yeah. But we don't get the earthquake one. No, we don't want to work on the earthquake one. But we know what we have now is hurricane, right? And therefore, that's covered for years 24, 25, 26, and 27. And it's a part of the whole natural disaster risk financing policy, a very layered approach to it. And that is also a part of the whole IMF program. So Jamaica was actually on course doing this work before we accessed the IMF program, right? So let's look at monetary performance. That's what we're done with fiscal now. Let's look at this natural disaster risk is really good protection, insurance protection for Jamaica. And the layered approach that we have, I believe it is the best that it has ever been in terms of providing us with coverage. Everybody, well, Keenan, you guys will remember Gilbert in Jamaica bachelor, and I got ahead of a republic, right? Yeah. You read the history book out there, right. So let's look at the monetary performance. Inflation has happily come back into the range at 5.6% in the month of March, into the 4.6% range. Core inflation also has come down to 5.9%, lower than the 6.1% in February 2024 and March 2022. So we see inflation on a general downward trend, and that is referring to the BOJ target range. Inflation is a big ticket item for Jamaica at this point in time, because it drives interest rates, it drives monetary policy, because the BOJ is doing their darndest best to get inflation back into the target range, right? So the BOJ indicated that the inflation is on a downward trajectory. In our meeting, it's on a downward trajectory. However, right, on March 28th, they held interest rates stable at 7%, right? Because they're committed to exchange rate stability, high Jamaican dollar liquidity, keeping Jamaican dollar liquidity to issuing BOJ CDs, pulling money out of the market to keep the pressure off of the exchange rate, and also just to reduce demand as much as they can to reduce inflationary pressures on the market. Right? So in their most recent assessment, they suggested that inflation, this was at March, from their monetary policy committee, they suggest that inflation would remain above the target range between March 24 and June 2025. That's what it is suggested, right? That is not where we want to see inflation. We would like to see inflation stay within the 46% range as it came in March. This is where we want to see inflation within the range, so that we can have some easing of monetary policy. That's what we really want to see. However, in their calculations that they had used on their modeling, they had included the fear increase in April 1, right? And what they had said was that the inflation was driven by significantly by the fear increases before, and they had modeled into their projections the fare increase on April 1. So now the government has subsequently announced the postponement of the second phase of the PPP fare increase, which was scheduled to take April 1. So they now have to back that out of their model, right? So the BOJ will be revising its projections based on the comment this data and for consideration at their next monetary policy committee for the next policy decision, which is due May 20th, 2024, right? So hopefully we see some moderation of the their projections of being out of the range for that extended period of time. NIR, as we said, as continues is at historic highs. I don't think Jamaica has ever seen an NIR of $5 billion. Never, right? And therefore, you know, it really gives us a cushion. You know, if you look across the region, the only country that has the freest flow of exchange in, I think, I mean, in the English speaking area probably is Jamaica. I mean, I don't call it names, but the foreign exchange regime is right. You know, free flow of funds, investors can come, they can get their currency, they can invest, they can convert. So therefore, having these reserves are important because it's important to investors and foreign direct investors, local investors, everyone, right? These inflows, and we are way ahead of the ARA metrics, the assessing reserve adequacy metrics at 122%. So we're way ahead. And this NIR is built up through FX purchases of $448 million, and because we passed the IMF test, we got $253 million on March 1st. You know, this IMF program that we're in is not one of those programs. It's because we are a good credit, because our policy framework is good, because we have demonstrated the width, and we have our fiscal responsibility and running a good economy that we are able to activate with precautionary liquidity line and right? And it's not because, you know, it wasn't because of a great need, as we have seen in the past, where we needed IMF programs. We are accessing a program which is really for those countries that are doing that, right? And they make these lines available. And therefore, we have to draw down $353 million and push it over to $5 billion. Foreign exchange market has been fairly stable. We saw a little appreciation on this because institutions would have been paying their taxes and maybe some conversion of US dollar into Jamaican dollar to pay their taxes. At the end of March, the BOJ continues to intervene in the market with their hedge reserves, intervene on 8 occasions, average sale of about $26 million US over time they intervene, right? Remittances continue to normalize. We saw the highs during COVID. They continue to normalize down $90 million over the period, right? Tourism arrivals continue to do very well. For the March quarter, 753,000 tourist arrivals in Jamaica, and which is up 7.6% year over year, and a total of 2.8 million tourists visited in 2023-24, a 9% increase in 2022. The tourism continues to be extremely well. Private sector credit growth in loans grew 10.6 billion or 19% over the previous March, which was in January. This was January to January, January month over January month in 2023. So it shows that the individuals are borrowing and with the borrowing. As we said, the IMF program, we met the IMF program targets, structural benchmarks under the Jamaica precautionary and liquidity line and the resilience and sustainability facility arrangement. All structural benchmarks were achieved and all the indicative targets, quantitative targets were met. And so therefore we're in good shape, and that's why we're able to draw down that $53 million on March 1st. Labor markets continue to achieve historically low unemployment rates, 4.2% in October 23, and that's down from 7.1% the year before. What is particularly pleasing for me when I look at these numbers is that the labor force actually increased by 48,900 people. And that compared to up to 2021, so labor force increased. But that number was reflecting a reduction of 5.5% in the number of persons outside the labor force. So people are coming into the labor force now. So those that were not choosing to go and look for work, they have now got themselves to the labor force and they're looking for work. That is a very good sign, right? For the labor markets, right? GDP grew by 2.6% for calendar. We're going to for GDP and 1.7%. That was down to from 5.2 the previous year. That was a COVID bounce still right? We seem to be returning to our historic range of 1 to 2%. If you're going to increase productivity, if we're going to increase this range, you have some work to do to get out of this range. This is all the rate to speak to our low growth 1 to 2% range, and we need to get into 3, 4, 5%. That's where we need to get up for that. That is the case for productivity, right? The economy expanded by 1.7% in October to December. That was driven primarily by hotels and restaurants, which grew 8.3%, 9.4%, and 21.5%. Construction was down about 3.3%. Right? For the January to March quarter, growth is projected to be in between the 1.5% to 2.5% range. BOJ projects GDP growth of 1 to 3% for 23-24 and 1 to 2% for 24-25. So right back into that range. The MOF projects 1.8% growth, and this is the fiscal policy paper for 24-25 GDP growth, and that's the key assumption in their budget. So let's go a little bit to some kind of conclusions, outlook, and highlights from this from our overview of the economy. Right? Globally, what we're seeing is global growth has remained steady, down from the high, but remains steady around projected to end the year 2023. Right? 2020 at 3.2% on the same base in 2024 and 2025. So therefore, everybody is worried about the recession. Recession, no, we're looking at the level off. That's on a global deal. Global inflation continues to trend downward, just like in Jamaica, from 6.8% in 2020, projected to fall to 5.9%, 4.5%. We all heard the Fed yesterday in terms of the inflation employment numbers. They're moving in the right direction, but they're not where they want to be yet. But what they have indicated that they're not necessarily increase rates, but they're looking more to see inflation coming to their 2% growth range so that we can affect them reduce rates. So this is all driven by inflation. Okay? Then we go to Jamaica. And Jamaica, the BOJ projects 1 to 2%, and as I said, the Minister of Finance and the BOJ project 1.3%. Right? The GDP projected growth numbers could be at risk as the contractionary BOJ monetary policies continue in their efforts to manage inflation. Okay? So therefore, what is that contractionary monetary policy? Tight liquidity conditions in the market, putting Jamaican dollars out. As a result, because what you're seeing is you may have the businesses that are paying high interest costs, but the average, because people are trying to protect the retail consumer, it impacts their margins, right? And therefore you have spread compression, price compression. You can't pass on, the business can't pass it on to the consumer because this is exactly what they want for inflation to come back within the range. And therefore, corporate income taxes are therefore reduced because of tightened monetary policy, higher elevated interest rates over the last 18 months or so, when interest rates are held at these levels, right? So as I said, the knock-on effect is the spread compression, and therefore, as the Minister of Finance pointed out, they would have seen lower taxes from the financial sector being remitted, which is also a component of that corporate income tax being remitted, right? As we said, the BOJ has highlighted that inflation is on a general downward trend, right? September 2025. However, with the postponement of the April 1 increase in PPP, we can expect some moderation because of this in the inflation numbers, because those numbers were moderated, as I said before. And therefore, hopefully, we will see when the BOJ does their numbers and they come back to us and explain where their projected inflation is, that it will be moderated. And therefore, as the Bank of Jamaica governor has said, he would like to see interest rates probably start coming down. And I believe that we are very welcome move by the central bank for businesses and consumers in general, right? The only risk that we see to inflation is basically supply chain condition because of geopolitical risk and adverse weather events, right? So when we look at the fiscal risk, so the fiscal risks are where because of the fall off in revenues in the month of March, right? The fiscal risk will be fairly elevated at this point in time. So they will be higher than 3 days ago, right? When we saw the revenue concerns, right? So the fiscal risks are elevated. And because tax revenues were behind for the month of March by 20%, right? So, as we said, the tax revenues actually grew by 10% to fall off in March. We know it's in the capital of the corporate income tax primarily. That drove the fall off. So therefore, the Ministry of Finance has some work to do to recalibrate the numbers because they did not have the benefit of these numbers when they calibrated their budget. And therefore, the MOF will need to factor into their plans going forward, and revisions would seem likely in relationship to their expenditures. But they have to analyze the data, and they have to look at what it comes in as there could have been some timing issues, etc. in terms of taxing being omitted on time. However, we do know that property income tax is right up. Yeah? The GOJ has projected inflows of $45 billion from securitization of receivables to fund the 24-25 budget. This is a one-off, right? And it is included in non-tax. It's a one-off and it's not repeatable. So therefore, you can't bake this into your numbers going forward as a revenue number that you can expect next year in 25-26, right? So therefore, as they look at their more medium term, they have to look at the tax revenue, they have to look at the overall revenue without this, the flows of what kind of billion dollars, right, into their revenue streams, right, to fund the budget. The big risk we have on is the rigidity of the budget, because what we have seen over the last 3 years with this public sector compensation restructure is that wages and salaries have gone from $222 billion in 21-22 to $414 billion in 24-25, right? That is significant. That is significant, and this is across the board for public sector workers. This is the kind of increase that we are seeing on a $200 billion increase in compensation, wages and salaries to the public sector. That is a material, substantial increase to the public sector. There's been a lot of noise around this, but at the end of the day, the public sector compensation restructure exercise and the resetting of the wages and salaries within the 16-band structure have increased that public sector workers have done well with this restructure exercise. No two questions about it, right? And therefore, what we have seen is then, therefore, it has moved from 9.6% of GDP in terms of wages and salaries. We used to have a fiscal rule that you hold wages and salaries at 9%, right? And that fiscal rule was removed, and now 12, and therefore we're at 12.6% of GDP. So if we're paying our public sector taxpayer money, paying them so well, no we want the productivity. So therefore, we have to increase the productivity from our public sector workers, right? Because the Minister of Finance has said they're going to put in place a performance management system. Resources are put in place for this performance management system. key performance indicators, etc. Because we must get increased productivity from this big spend, because this big spend that we know in our public sector has made our whole expenditure profile very rigid. Very, very rigid. Like we don't have a lot of degrees of freedom, and therefore we must get productivity and greater efficiency and delivery of services to the people of Jamaica from this big spend that we have for public sector. Right? So our public sector, we know they sacrificed for many years, do many wage freezes, and there is a commitment by the government of Jamaica to do this public sector compensation restructure to reduce the complexity, to reduce the number of scales, the amount of allowances that were all over the place. It was a very hazard and disorganized system that was in place. I believe commendations are due to this Minister of Finance, the Ministry of Finance, and the government of Jamaica for this public sector compensation restructure, and to set these wages at these levels, which has made them very competitive or even higher wages and salaries than the private sector. Right? So that is without a doubt, and that is unquestionable. That is something that kind of an exercise. Yeah. No, so where we are now with inflation trending nicely downwards, and we have a big record high net international reserves, we have the opportunity to look at the optimal monetary policy mix, right? Because everything is good, but where we know the pressure we're feeling is due to the tight monetary policy, right? And therefore the BOJ can be proactive and look at reducing interest rates, armed with the reserve, that they know that they can, the exchange rate stability can be maintained, because we do have the reserves, we do have the reserves, so you can maintain exchange rate stability. Inflation is trending in the is trending into the range. They have removed the PPP increase in April 1. So it is maybe the BOJ, and we would probably suggest they look hard at reducing interest rates going forward, right? Into their May deliberations, right, for the monetary policy committee. It would change the market dynamics and bring some relief to business and consumers, and we could now begin to reposition more investments in the real economy. What are people doing now? Buying fixed deposits and at high rates, and buying Bank of Jamaica CDs, which are ranging in the range of between 10 and 13% on a 30-day CD. What you want those monies to be going to is into real investments in the economy, right? And therefore, we need to probably see that change in the optimal monetary policy mix, right? Because this is showing up in our tax revenues because of the tight monetary policy, high interest rates, margins are being compressed for businesses, and therefore this is where we probably need to look as a country and address this policy mix if we are going to maintain our stellar record of macroeconomic stability and get to that. That's it. People, thank you very much.
I thank you very much, Mr. Duncan, for that very detailed presentation. I know we have questions. However, I'm going to start with online because those questions were fast out the block for a while. And we do have 2 questions online, and I'm going to start there and then come back to the room. I believe the questions were from Stephen, and I'm going to go ahead. The question, it says, since corporate income tax is the cause of the reduction of tax revenue, then it suggests that companies are booking less profit, or more companies are folding, just like his favorite vegan restaurant, he put that in. Does the reduction, however, hint at underlying cost of living crisis in the economy? That's corporate income tax. Reduction in corporate income tax.
Yeah.
It says it's the cause of the reduction of the tax revenue. Right. So does the reduction, however, hint at an underlying cost of living crisis in the economy?
But we know that inflation cumulatively over the last couple of years, it's probably somewhere around 25-30% over the last 3-4 years, right? Went from 11% and 7-8% in the long-term rates, and then 6%. You know what I mean? So therefore, purchasing power has been eroded, and you have the different topics that come out in the CPI. The purchasing power has been eroded, right? And therefore, you know, but we still see underlying strength because of the, you know, the labor markets were unemployment at 4.2%, and the labor market, the numbers are actually improving, and we see people still spending. And we do agree with that purchasing power has been eroded. That's a global phenomenon. Inflation is happening globally, and that was, you know, coming right out of the COVID with the supply chain disruptions right into Ukraine and Russia with the commodity prices increasing, grain, etc., and the significant liquidity that was pumped into the market in monetary policy easy during the COVID period, and then some of those excesses will have to be reversed. So yes, we businesses that who would have to borrow, they would have seen interest rates increase, and therefore their margins will be squeezed, right? And therefore, depending on the business you're in, you know, some you know, if you're in a business you know, selling you know, luxury goods, then you know, and then your customers discretionary income are reduced, yeah, then you could see that your business is there is some slowdown in your business. Yeah. But margins have been compressed, and because you know, you can't pass it all on to the consumer. So when your interest cost as a business is increased, you can't pass it on to the consumer because you have competition. So therefore, your margins become compressed. You make less profit, and therefore you pay less taxes.
All right, thank you. I will read the next question before I come to the room. The NIR is at record levels and the FX has remained stable since COVID. The seesaw effect, however, was 50% cumulative inflation since COVID. Should the BOJ allow the dollar to depreciate in order to ease inflationary pressures?
That actually would have. People say you have imported inflation. Right, so therefore, the appreciation of the market, the foreign exchange would actually be inflationary, and therefore that's why the Bank of Jamaica has been very much focused on exchange rate stability, right, through monetary policy, interest rates, and through interventions in the policy using the reserves.
All right, great, thank you. I'll go to the room for questions.
Siobhan Campbell, Nationwide News.
Yes, sir.
Outside of counting on the BOJ to essentially adjust their interest rates to probably drive the economy further, what levers does the government have to address the shortfall in their budgetary allocations at this point?
Well, there is the end of the year with a surplus, so there's no shortfall in this money. So we have projections of tax revenue, right? And therefore, there would be a gap between their baseline in terms of the tax revenues that are coming at the end of the year. And as we said, if we go to the budget table, if we look at the budget table, we see where they're projected for in the fourth supplementary estimates for 856 million of tax revenue. What came in was 831. So therefore, they would have to grow tax revenue by $92 billion to make up for the shortfall as a result of the baseline being less, right? So therefore, what we have seen is tax revenue growth, but as the Minister of Finance has said, they need to look at the numbers, look at the inflows, look if there are any timing issues in March, and they may have to, if they are able to, there would have to be adjustments between revenues and expenditures to be able to hit the targets, with, fiscal rules and to continue with our reduction in debt. So therefore, it has to, if you're going to keep your fiscal balances where you want them to be, and your primary surplus where you want it to be, So you can continue on with debt reduction strategy, you would have to make adjustments in the budget, either in revenue or in expenditure. Yeah.
But in terms of revenues, the only options would be to essentially increase taxes, or are there other methods?
Well, we just saw the securitization of the receivables.
But wasn't that already programmed in?
Yes. So therefore, that's already programmed, and so therefore, you need to look at the expenditures, right? Now, we're talking about sustainability going forward. If you look at expenditures, the one-off expenditures in there are the capital expenditures, they're one-off, right? That is what program $20 billion this year, 20 billion next year. Those are one-off expenditures. Those are you could tie to the securitization receivings. Then you have one-off, which is the income tax, reverse income tax. That's a one-off. Yeah, and that is if all those who are eligible are assumed to take up this income tax credit, well, you see where that number comes out of. So therefore, they're going to have to manage the expenditure profile because this government is committed, as they have said, to no new taxes. So I don't think that they're looking to change that policy position at this point in time. I think they would probably look more on the expenditure side to determine where to look at making sure that they meet fiscal balance and fairness. That's my view.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was quite a bit surprised with seeing construction going on. When I look around things here, I'm trying to up and down the country and seeing a lot of construction taking place. So yet it seems to be done. The more happening.
But I think they're off to their heights because during COVID, I mean, it was and after COVID, I mean, there's a lot of spending. People are spending on their homes and their spending really grew significantly. So it's not that it has slowed down. That's slowed down quarter over quarter. It's not like construction has stopped. It's just not as fast. And that's why there are more investments and not as it used to be. And because high interest rates will always together also while mortgage rates will be up, right? The cost of funding projects will be up, right? And therefore that will also cause the property of taxes because these are properties that are in this area that are earning from the real estate sector. So that if that slows, therefore there was impact them. But it would slow naturally because of it's just for people we have investors and businesses with probably a wait and see attitude. Let me see if interest rates are going to come down because if I'm going to finance my project, I'm going to finance it at these elevated interest rates because a lot of these borrowers, they borrow in the private credit market and they are borrowing that is more the capital markets and they're borrowing in excess of 16%. That is going to squeeze their margins in terms of the profitability of projects. So therefore you would have investors taking away from the attitude waiting on that I believe slower than thus the consumer who is paying higher mortgage rates, they would have to know because I'm not going to go now. You're going to have less people being able to apply units because the mortgages are higher. Okay.
Yeah, delay implementation.
Okay. Or the capex.
Just following on from that, you see a lot of the real estate industry, you see the real estate industry, a lot of new units going up, a lot. But when you talk particularly to the younger people, a lot of them, they make the fact that they can't afford to. And the original emphasis on saying realized lower income housing. What's your view on that? Do you see that creating almost a bubble, or do you see that situation as something that we should keep an eye on?
We need to go sit down someday. What we see is, you see more people moving into St. Catherine's. I mean, if I was a suggestion, I recommend either the St. Thomas because it's cheaper. I mean, you have the big road highway going to St. Thomas, right? But in a bit, right? Therefore, what you're telling me is that, this is where, you're going to be looking is within the Keystone area. Besides, I have that's in there. However, the income levels have been increasing, and yeah, I mean, where do we see, if you guys were to say, where are people are buying? People are buying, houses, I see it in my immediate surroundings, people are buying, and they use the energy benefit as much as they can, it's happening, we got happening from the dashboard, and it's happening from, in domestic market. Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I asked a lot of the young people, they tell me that buy home, it's profit.
It depends. Where do you set your hat?
And I don't know. To me, from my experience, I look back at myself,
Right.
and I look at them 25 years ago or something. And probably coming from the UK, I remember something come out of the university to get the first job. At that time, a lot of flats were between 6 to 800. You get married with this and costing the thousand pounds, right? Well, we was 24 that. So basically,
Yeah.
when I moved there, was sorry. I moved there. So yes, and now it's your income. And then you probably get an apartment, 3 rooms, and your friends are moving, and you a bill. And you kind of, you made your way. Yeah. But I don't see that. That's the thing, I don't see that, so to me, I'm trying to do that.
For me, I mean, people take the trends to home ownership. Then start with if they want to run another hand. Or then buy it, start a unit and throw more in another one. Jamaicans, I think Jamaicans generally, are serious about their ownership.
Yeah, they are.
Much. I believe somebody added online, Stephen added that the PIOJ had told him there's no housing affordable index. And if we had that, that would address Al's question in some part.
Okay, yeah.
Right. And just another question relating to the March revenue shortfall. Wanted to know if you have a response to that as outlined by Dr. Clark.
Yeah. We spoke to that earlier. Where we saw the shortfall in the March was with the was driven by the corporate income taxes. Okay? And that being of 45 and then in the other areas were primarily driven by corporate income taxes, businesses, margin compression, the financial system. And that's really where the challenge is.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Do you think that the government wants to do with the cumulative tools, corporates now is going out to get these folks to get the taxes, like already under the top now, you can see them there, where budgets are down, revenues are down, and without the income statement. So, and then you have this one talking about in how we by the government to kind of get this the tax that what's going to do with it.
Well, I mean, they're going to have to probably get more vigilant. They're going to have to consider to make taxes easy to do with online, through online channels. The TAJ, would have to consider efforts on because they would have to ensure that, the revenue is where they're going after revenue. So it's compliance. It's not just increase compliance and really ensuring that who is the pay taxes to pay their taxes.
why do you think they bid for that part? Why do you think they like that?
Well, no, I'm not saying anyone didn't pay their because I'm saying that their profits were low and therefore, their profits were low and their profit income tax were lower. Some people could have timing of cash flow with cash flow issues and therefore they would have had to delay their payment. And we will see that if it, as the Minister of Finance indicated, that there could have been timing issues. The TAJ will have to follow through because what they saw in previous years is not what they saw this year, and therefore they will not see the difference. If you look at this number, this is right down the yield on the MOS website. TAJ projected 1.5 billion, 87%. Right? Yeah. So therefore, they have some catching up to do. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. I think we have one last question from Nationwide.
Yes, there's matter, when we look now at the actual outturn in terms of the revenues, it's not an underlying economic problem, certainly at this point. And it's not a problem of or revenue shortfall. It's essentially what we have to pay in terms of the wage to GDP target. A $200 billion increase in your wage bill cannot look good on any balance sheet.
Right.
So why should we now return to constraining wages to a certain level of GDP rather than removing the rule? Or should we have not have removed that rule at all in the first place?
Right.
Because it was 9%. It was wage to GDP of 90%.
Right.
So
Right.
we've added 3-4% more onto the wage bill
Right.
over the course of the last 3 years.
Right.
Should we have stuck to that 9% target as had been requested from the year?
Well, I think sometimes, we look at where public sector salaries were in relation to private sector. They would have been at much lower levels than private sector. But if we're going to be able to ensure that we put up with the gender performance, we have to pay competitive wages. So I believe there was a decision taken that we are going to compensate our people there and then competitively and then demand more of them through a performance management system and increase productivity and continue to rationalize the public sector through the mergers of public sector companies, etc., and to get efficiency. Now, what the public sector and the government of Jamaica need to demonstrate to us now is how we're going to get that performance management system in so that we can get increased productivity. And once we get increased productivity, that will go to the top line, which is growth, which is GDP. Once you move that GDP number up, then the wages and salaries to GDP number will improve. The public sector now, and the government of Jamaica have to demonstrate how they're going to increase productivity so that we can improve value-added activity, because GDP is value-added activity, and we're going to need more from our public sector in delivering value-added activity to ensure the economy can grow, right? And we can deliver services to our taxpayers, right? We are paying these salaries more efficiently, right? And better levels of service to all people, right?
Yeah, but still, should we return to no constraint?
So where we may need to revisit at some point in time is where do we set this? Do we need a new fiscal rule around wage and salaries? I believe we need to say, with any budget template that you have, where should wages and salaries be in relationship to your overall expenditure profile, and in relationship to GDP? Maybe we need to revisit it and then say, okay, we are projected for wages and GDPs to be at 12% over the next 12 to 13% in that range. Within the fiscal policy paper, we are going to ensure that it stays within that range and it can only go down from here going forward. Or we can demand of our public sector and government of Jamaica that they bring that they keep it flat, because already projected in. Our public sector workers should be happy now because they are consuming much greater percentage of our expenditure. Therefore, we need increased productivity, and let us not Let us not move this beyond what is contained in the fiscal policy paper. In terms of wages and salaries and GDP, right? Let's see where that is. Let's look at it. Between 24, 25, 12.6, 25, 26, 12.7, 26, 27, 12.9%, and 13.2%. We need to say that we need to keep these numbers. Where do we put a fiscal rule around this? Because it can't go north of this. That's your right, Siobhan.
Okay, also, just a follow, I have it's more of a thought to myself. Because as you rightfully pointed out, at this point in time, this specific moment in time, government salaries are almost more attractive than private sector salaries for most professions.
Yeah.
The government is not exactly the greatest engine of productivity and growth in the economy. And when you're in an economy that is only growing 1 to 2%, 1 to 3% annually, can you bear the burden of having such a high wage bill?
Right. So, what I've heard, and the Minister of Finance has spoken to it in the budget presentation, is the performance management system. Right? And that performance management system is to be designed and implemented, I think, this will begin in this year, looking to end next year, right? And it's going to be as complex as a public sector compensation and restructure plan to figure out by various departments, various key performance indicators and measures, such that we need to get value for our money. So the Jamaican taxpayers, right, need to see how productivity is increased. I'm a financial sector company. If I run a financial sector company, I need to ensure that we get more efficient, right, and we increase productivity. The government of Jamaica and the public service need to ensure that they become more efficient. They have these numbers here. Wages and GDP, which are way out of the range of the 9%, which was a fiscal rule at this point in time. We need to insist as a taxpayer and as a country that this don't go beyond these levels. And what we need to see is some effort to actually bring it below these levels, right? And would we need to, and we probably need to look to revisit the fiscal rule, know that this public sector compensation restructure is done, and everybody's competitively compensated. No, we probably need to look at a fiscal rule and say, we're putting a ceiling on this. That's probably what needs to be shared.
I just one final, I promise is the final thing for me. How does the private sector now respond to this? Because I actually have working knowledge of this happening. I see where people looking at JIS report the salaries, eyebrows raised, and then looking at the newsroom salary and say to themselves, why am I working here when I can go just work for the government and have to work?
Oh, yeah.
How does the private sector respond to that?
We're going to give you some performance targets by next year that you have to work twice as hard as private sector. No, I know. It's how does the private sector respond?
Yes, especially when you're putting in the position where they're now constrained in terms of the interest rates that they are paying.
Yeah. I was about to say, add on to that.
So the government of Jamaica sets a floor on wages and salaries.
But to his point, and it's an excellent point, but also you've got to factor in the political calculus. Because you're going to think to yourself, all right, 200 billion, I want to pay that for them. So they have the ballot box come next year. And they're going to be mightily annoyed if that doesn't come through. If your public sector doesn't run to the ballot box, say, look, it's happy days, we've got plenty of energy. But then again, and to this point, and you see it, particularly for us in the business, corporates are going to say, well, hey, what about us? We want money too. We want to cash in. And then as the trend, as the financial secretary yourself, you're seeing your net interest income dwindle, your profits dwindle, and yet your expenses, you're getting demand from the workers saying, hey, we want to figure out. They could turn out to be a perfect storm. And you probably the example of us. To attract talent in media now, they're telling you kids are turning you GIS.
All right.
You know, that's healthy for labor markets and the price of the, I think they will have to get those, just to limit what, you know, this, what the public sector was severely underpaid for a very long period. I know that they're saying, competitive with private sector, we're not running to them.
It's a high wire.
Yeah.
It's a high wire.
Because, I mean, I understand most private sector business can't afford
Yeah.
massive increases, not the level of 30-40%, 60% in some cases,
Yeah.
case that the government just handed over.
Right.
And as I said, you now made it in an ironic twist where the government salary is more attractive than working in the private sector.
Yeah. Well, that's 400 billion, $200 billion later.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Not seeing any more questions. We are now at the end of our press briefing. And we have gone through the presentation. And I will now just hand over to Mr. Duncan to make the last remarks as we close out this session.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming back. Interesting discussions. And we're in interesting times. I believe that our government of Jamaica and our independent central bank is committed to maintaining macroeconomic stability. I believe they're committed to fiscal responsibility. And as the data comes in and they analyze and understand exactly where they are in relationship to the revenues, then they will make the necessary adjustments to ensure that we continue with our debt trajectory, lowering our debt to GDP ratio. I believe that we will continue on that path. We expect that we will see and hear as the data is analyzed and tabled. We will see if there has to be any revisions. It's highly likely that there's a revisions after analysis.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to those who stayed online as well. And we will be sending out all the relevant material as well as the recording to you. And thanks again and have a great day.
Yeah, you shared it on the also.
Thank you very much.